Well, hello, welcome to Digital Influence. Today I'm interviewing Rob Dial. Now, Rob has a few fantastic skills and a great podcast going called MWF Motivation. Uh, I'm really excited to talk about Rob because he's done amazing things in bringing his passion for helping people get more motivated and successful in business and shared it and enjoyed incredible success. So obviously that motivation is driving his results and success, and we all want to know the secret as to how he makes that happen every day and how he shares his message. Welcome on the show, Rob.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here and share as much value as I can to your audience.
Yeah, fantastic. Like, it really is hard to know where to start, and thanks so much for coming on. So you run a
Absolutely.
podcast called MWF Motivation. It's got a really impressive growth record so far. Tell us a bit more about the show and why you started it, but also where you've got to with it.
Yeah. So I'll kind of give you an idea. So when I was 19, I don't know if you've ever heard of Cutco knives because you don't live in America, but Cutco knives are knives that college kids sell door to door. And I sold knives door to door when I was 19 years old, and got really into personal development. And the main reason why was because when I had a little bit of a I guess you could say troubled. I had some things happen to me when I was younger. My parents got divorced when I was 9 because my father was an alcoholic. And then when I was 15, my father passed away from being an alcoholic. And so I had some stuff going on in my head that wasn't necessarily resolved. When I got to 19 years old, this company that I was with just really promoted personal development and growing and trying to become the best version of yourself, which was the first time I had ever heard that in my life. And I hired a coach who worked with the company. I paid him $500 a month when I was 19 years old, which was more than I paid in rent. And I saw a massive improvement in myself, in my bank account, in my sales, but mostly in my headspace and just feeling like I'm all of the stuff that I felt like I probably should have gone to a psychologist for. I was actually starting to figure out myself. Well, then when I left that company, I went into the corporate world and did sales training and sales for companies as well. And I lost the connection with people. When I was with the sales company, originally the first one, Cutco, I trained over 2,000 sales reps by the age of 24. And so I loved being able to teach personal development to people and watch it change their lives. When I got into the corporate world, it was about sell, sell, sell. It wasn't about like, hey, let's go to conferences, let's read books, let's do these things. And so one day I was just like, I feel like I have a lot of information that's sitting inside of my brain. Over the past decade, I've read hundreds of books, and I just want to start a podcast and just put all of the information that I can out there. And I heard the average podcast has 7 episodes before the person quits. And so I said, okay, I'll record 14 and we'll see how it goes. So I recorded 14 and it kind of caught on. And today was episode 254. And so it's 3 times a week, every single week for the past a little bit over a year and a half now. And it's seen massive growth. It's about to hit a couple million downloads, and it's been a fun journey so far.
Wow, that's just awesome. And we obviously, it's not all about the numbers, but that really is meteoric rise. There can't be many podcasts that have grown that quickly.
Not people that are quote unquote nobodies. People that
Yeah.
have a big following. I had no following at all, which now it's grown to be quite large. But before I was kind of a nobody. Nobody would have known my name. I didn't have any social following or anything else besides then. So I don't know statistically how it ranks against others, but I feel like it's done pretty well.
Yeah, well, you've obviously sort of aligned with your superpower in doing that, because it must just be spot on what people are after.
Yeah.
I guess people need motivation, and that is something a lot of people report from podcasts, isn't it? That's where they go for things like motivation, inspiration, that daily sort of pep talk with their walk or morning coffee.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I feel like well, I pretty much know at this point, the only thing that really holds somebody back is them holding themselves. And so I'm interestingly enough starting to hate the word motivation, even though I've run a podcast called MWF Motivation. And the reason why is because I get emails from people and they say, Rob, like, I woke up today and I don't have motivation. How do I get motivation? And they act as if it's like some magical, fairy comes and sprinkles fairy dust, like motivational dust on them. And they're just magically motivated that day. And that's what I've come to realize. People think of motivation. That's not really what it is. And what people, I guess, are really searching for, I found, is they're searching for drive. They want to be driven. They want to wake up. They want to be able to be kicked in the face and continue to keep going, or they want to do things they don't want to do. And that's what they're really searching for. And so what I've come to realize is that motivation is very fickle. Drive and determination is something that keeps you going more than anything else. And so, I think most people are searching for that, because everybody knows everybody. I always hear this from people. I know what I need to do. I just can't make myself do it. And so that's really what people need the most help with.
Yeah, and I relate entirely to that.
Yeah.
With your decision to share your message, it sounds like quite a very natural, sort of authentic, almost naive response. Whereas, like, I think a lot of people these days start podcasts because they think, oh, I could get a sponsor, and it's seen as a
Right.
revenue stream very early on. Whereas it does seem to have sort of come from a very natural place for you, and you've really, again, hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
As that's gone on, how has it affected your attitude to sharing the information and your life as well?
So yeah, interestingly enough, so I had the idea for the podcast and went to the biggest conference that I think it's the biggest in the world. And it was before I launched my podcast, and I was talking to people who have podcasts or were about to launch them, and every single person kept asking me, well, how do you plan on monetizing your podcast? And for me, that kind of felt like everyone went into starting a podcast with the wrong intentions. The reason why I started a podcast was just as a passion project. I felt like, for me, a lot of the things that I had learned in the books that I had read changed my life completely. Literally changed my life, went from one person to a completely different person. And I felt obligated to share that message with other people. And that was it. And so everyone kept saying, how are you going to monetize it? How are you going to monetize it? And I have, 10 months after I started, I did monetize it. It's been doing really well. But my whole thing that I kept telling people is I'm going to treat it like Facebook. And what I mean by that is that I'm going to grow it as big as I possibly can and worry about no money, but I'm just going to worry about serving as many people as possible. And then I'll figure it out. Maybe one day I'll monetize it. Maybe one day I'll just keep it going forever. And so for me, it was never about money. A lot of people I've never had one sponsor. I've had a lot of sponsors reach out to me, and it's never been about money. It's always been about, how can I get the best message out to the people that can, if one person listens to it and it changes their life, then it's accomplished its goal. And so that's really what the whole mission was from the beginning.
Fantastic. And a lot of our audience are coaches or consultants or someone who do have a skill that benefits from that positioning. And so from where you're coming with that sort of background, that's the approach rather than the sponsorship angle. If someone was interested in monetization, do you feel it's better to be just using it as a brand platform?
Yeah, I do. Honestly, I could monetize it and I could make, thousands of dollars a month off of it if I wanted to monetize it with advertisers based on, my CPM, how many people listen to it. I could make a decent amount of money off of it if I wanted to. But I think that with most podcasts, not with all of them, but I feel like with a lot of them, it kind of devalues the podcast in some sort of way, or devalues the YouTube station, because I know a lot of people do that as well. And I'm not saying anything bad about the people who do it. Just in my opinion, I felt like it would devalue mine. That's the way that I felt. And so what I thought, and what I think for everybody, is if you're a coach and you have a podcast or a YouTube station, instead of having other people's products that you're pushing, why don't you have your own products you're pushing? You're going to make much more money off it. And I mean, like 4, 5, 6 times as much as you would if you were to just push somebody else's product. And so for me, it's like, have some sort of coaching. If you're a coach, have a coaching program, whether it's one-on-one, whether it's a group coaching program or courses. But just make sure whatever it is, you're not coming from the idea of just trying to make money, but you're trying to serve the people who listen to you the best that you possibly can. And that's honestly how I came up with my group coaching. Was I had, I've been doing one-on-one coaching for a long time, about 10 years now. And so I had one-on-one coaching on one side, and then I had my free podcast on the other side. And so I only take 12 one-on-one coaching clients, and I'm completely full there. And I have tens of thousands of people listen to my podcast. So that means that there's a huge opportunity, a huge area of people who are not being served, who wanted more of my time, but couldn't necessarily, fit into, there was only 12 people and I was completely booked. And so, and I know some people are like, well, why would you only take 12 people? Reason why is because I love my free time. I make enough money to be able to do the things I want. I'm about to move to Italy with my girlfriend for a while for 6 months, and I want to be able to experience Italy and not be on the phone the entire time. So so that's where my group coaching came from. So I have, my one-on-one coaching clients, which I have 12, and then I have about 148 group coaching clients as well. So so I have that, and then I have other business that I run on top of that, which is an Amazon business. But yeah, I think it's, if you have the opportunity to monetize the podcast or whatever it is, if you're a coach out there, why not have your own product that you're using to monetize it versus, putting somebody else's product out there?
Awesome. Well, thanks for that insight. It was sort of an unexpected topic, but it's sort of the elephant in the room with podcasting these days. It's although in many ways it's one of the least interesting things to talk about. I know many people are fascinated. So tell me more about the motivation side of things and how you tie, in the message and how you mix up, sales, motivation, sort of life hacking and coaching type stuff in your show.
Yeah. So the thing I feel is different from my coaching than most coaching is, number one, I started doing when I was 19. When I started, when I was a sales rep, turning into being a sales manager, and I was actually coaching people when they were brand new sales reps. And I actually wanted to be a psychologist, but I hated school, terribly hated school, everything about it. And so I didn't want to continue going to school. And so I was like, I love psychology, but I don't want to go through 12 more years of this. And what I realized is that sales is psychology. Number one, everything in the world that you do is some sort of sales. And number two, all sales involves psychology. In order to get someone to give you their credit card, it involves some psychological, I don't want to use the wrong words as far as like saying persuasion, because that sounds like a bad connotation, but it does involve some type of psychological, persuasion in some sort of way. And so for me, I'm obsessed with psychology, and I'm also obsessed with neurology and the way the brain works and everything about it. And my theory is if I can figure out exactly how the brain works, and why we hold ourselves back, then I can also figure out a way to kind of hack it or, think about something in depth of like, why do we do this? Why do most people hold themselves back? Why are most people afraid to get outside of their comfort zone? What is this main fear that people have? And if I can figure that out, well, then I could pretty much figure out a way to reverse it so that somebody can go at their fears instead of away from their fears. And so that's kind of my obsession of how to get people to unlock their potential, because ultimately we all get one life and there's no reason to waste it because of the fact that we're worried about something that might happen in the future. We're worried about some sort of fear, which is probably, a crazy fear in the first place.
Fantastic. As you were saying that, it occurred to me there's one big challenge that a lot of coaches face when they're doing sales, and that is sort of coaching on sales calls. Could you share a little bit of insight around that? Because, in a way, we do need to inspire people to take action or, coach them through their fears, which you've addressed.
Mm-hmm.
But so often it turns into a free coaching session and people go, wow, amazing. Thanks for that. I'm all better now.
Yeah. So a couple of things. So number one, I personally do not try to sell anybody on coaching with me. I actually try to sell them off of coaching with me, is because number one, I'm actually a pretty hardcore person. And if I start coaching the wrong person, they're going to be offended very quickly, because I'm like, I wake up and I demand greatness for myself every single day. And I tell my one-on-one coaching clients, don't sign up unless you're okay with me forcing you to demand greatness from yourself, because I'm going to hold you to a higher standard than you've ever held for yourself in your entire life. And that alone will either scare the people away that you shouldn't be coaching with in the first place, or it's going to get the people who really want it tied in immediately. And you have to do no more selling on top of that. The one thing that's great about having a podcast or a YouTube or a blog is that I'm a very firm believer in your content should sell you more than you sell yourself on the phone. And so if I have 250 free episodes of my podcast, that is credibility that's being built every single time I'm in someone's ears. That is them listening to what I say, going, oh crap, I never thought of that, trying it, seeing something change in their life. And guess what? I don't even need to sell myself at all. At that point in time, they just need to make sure that they're getting the correct information from me and that it's lining up with their goals and what they actually want to do. And so for especially for one-on-one coaching, I always tell people, I've been in sales for 12 years. I consider myself a great salesperson. I will never sell you on coaching with me, because if we're doing a minimum package of 6 months of one-on-one coaching calls every single week, and I sell you hardcore, like, we're going to have some terrible phone calls. And so what I want you to do is go with your gut feeling. I always say with every person, if your gut says, do not coach with me, do not coach me. But if as I'm speaking, there's a part of you that's saying, hell yes, there's something that scares the crap out of me listening to this guy because I know he's going to push me, but I know I need that. That's what your gut says, then pull the trigger. And so that's the way that I kind of preface everything, because I've sold millions of dollars in products and all of those things. I feel like my podcast gives all of the credibility that I need for someone to listen to it and say, yeah, this guy actually knows what he's talking about. I think he could help me. Getting on the phone call to actually have a consultation real quick, I think should only reaffirm the people that are really interested in the coaching.
Fantastic. And really, you've got this incredible content funnel. So people are saturated with content. They know exactly what they're getting and who you are and where you sit in the marketplace. So, you know, all the marketing and demand building has been done before they even call you.
Right. 100%.
Do you do calls to action for coaching? Like, you know, at the end, is there a solid, hey, and if you want coaching this week?
Yeah. So are you talking about call to action on a sales call or call to action on an actual coaching
call? On your podcast, do you say, if you'd like to coach with me, do this, or is it
absolutely?
Yeah.
Every single call I do. At this point in time, so I still have a lot of people reaching out to me that are like, hey, I want to do one-on-one coaching with you. I, at this point in time, only have a wait list for one-on-one coaching. So there's absolutely nobody that can sign up with me. So I have a wait list of people who, number one, I think that here's a couple things that I think about coaching. If you have 30 to 40 people you're coaching, number one, I think you're going to forget about the people that you're coaching, right? I could have 30 to 40 people, but number one, I would be completely fried. My brain would be fried at the end of every single night if I actually did that. And number two, I feel like I would not be serving the people who I talk to, because I would forget about what we talked about. I'd be able to look at my notes and try to see if I remember exactly what we talked about. But also I think at the same time, if you're talking to 30 or 40 people or trying to completely fill up your schedule, I feel like you're not serving people as much. And so I think it's very beneficial for someone to have some sort of one-on-one coaching for sure, but then have some sort of group coaching as well. And the reason why is because both of them are still paying monthly. But you are able to at least get those people to get the value that they need, not get on the phone with someone who's been on 8 other coaching calls today and they have to flip through the notes to remember what they happened to talk about on the last call. And so I'm a firm believer in that. But yeah, every single podcast that I do, at the very beginning of my podcast, I have my intro, and the very next thing I say is, you know, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please subscribe to us. Also, if you're interested in coaching with me, here's the information. Go to mwfmotivation.com/schedule. And if they go to that schedule, it immediately takes them to my online calendar. They can just book themselves in my online calendar, and it's that simple.
Fantastic. And with your own sales coaching, do you have a particular style that you implement, or is it sort of based on you know, corporate tactics you've used, or a combination? How do you teach sales?
I think sales is different for everybody. I think it depends on the person. What I really think more than anything else is that action is what needs to be taken. And so I'll kind of give you an idea. Like I have someone on coach that I'm coaching right now. He's never been in sales his entire life, but he's got an opportunity to make a lot of money in sales. And so all I'm saying to him, and I'm prefacing this, and this is a mistake that I made when I was a new sales manager and I was coaching people, is I would talk about how amazing it would be. I'd talk about how much money they could make. And I would talk about the opportunity, which should be talked about, but I would never talk about how terrible it actually was, right? Making phone calls. No, I've coached thousands of sales reps. I've never seen somebody be like, man, I cannot wait to make cold calls right now. Right. And so I'm very open in saying, hey, listen, you know, if I'm talking to him, let's say his name's John, I'm like, John, listen, you're going to have to make 100 phone calls a day. And I'm going to be honest with you. Never in my life have I ever heard someone saying they love making cold calls. You're going to hate it. Absolutely 100% hate it. But here's what we're working towards. And the way to get people to be, if you're working with salespeople, the way to get a salesperson motivated to make phone calls they don't want to make is not to drive them to the numbers. It's not to drive them to the money. It's to drive them to the why that's behind the money. And so, for instance, if I were to say, you know, let's say my John, for instance, wants to make $100,000 this year. That's great. And I can drive him to try to make $100,000 this year. But money is people can be excited about it one moment, but they can also just be demotivated another moment as well. But if I can find his strong emotional attachment, the why behind his goal of why he's actually doing it, then I can figure out how to motivate him. So if I say, John, what's your goal for this year? I want to make $100,000. Okay. Why do you want to make $100,000? Because I want to support my family. Okay. What do you mean by that? Let's go deeper. And you go levels and levels and levels lower. Then I talk to John. He's like, well, I want to make $100,000 because we live in an apartment in a bad part of town. And I want to be able to buy a house in a better part of town to get my kids to go to a better school district. And I'm like, okay, and what would that do for their future? Well, it would set them up because they would have a better education and be able to go to college, and then they would be more successful than if they were to stay in that place. So what's more motivating when I get on the phone with them? John, don't forget, you want to make $100,000 this year, make your 100 phone calls a day. Or John, you want to make $100,000 this year because of the fact that you want to take your kids out of the terrible part of town that you live in, because you making 100 phone calls a day is going to get your children to have a better life after 18, 20, 24 years old. What you do every single day, those 100 phone calls, even though it doesn't seem like it's changing their life, is changing your children's life. So take it serious and make sure that you get it done every single day. That's how you get a sales rep to actually make phone calls when they don't want to make phone calls, because nobody wants to make phone calls. So if you can find out their why behind the goal, that's how you really motivate people.
Fantastic. Now, I know you've got another call coming up shortly, so we'll move toward wrapping up. Now, there's a question I ask my guests at the end, and that is if someone out there is listening and they've got something inside of them, it's a passion to start a business or quit their job and do something, or start the podcast. Do you have any tips about what you'd tell yourself when you were just getting started?
For sure. Ready, fire, aim is what I would say. So most people think it's ready, aim, fire. It's not. Most people are so concerned about making sure everything is perfect. A lot of people call themselves perfectionists, right? Everybody in the world, FYI, thinks they're a perfectionist. Welcome to being a human. And the question I want to ask you is, if somebody's listening, they say, well, I'm a perfectionist though. The question I want to ask them, and I want them to ask themselves in their own head, is, are you a perfectionist, or are you using perfectionism as a mask over a fear that's really deeper? So are you a perfectionist, or are you afraid that it's not good enough and you will be rejected? So maybe it's a fear of rejection. Are you a perfectionist, or do you have a fear of failure, and that's why you haven't put it out yet? And so what I always tell people is ready, fire, aim. Whenever everything I've ever done in my life, I put a little bit of planning into it and then just executed on it. Because if I wait too long, it never gets done. And everybody's been there before, where it's like they put too much planning into it and it's not perfect yet and it doesn't get done. The thing that I say is just do it. Like if you go back, if you're starting a podcast, if you're starting YouTube, or you're starting a blog, I'm going to be completely honest. The stuff that you're going to make, your first few episodes are going to suck. They're going to be so freaking bad. If you go back and listen to 254 episodes back for me, which is episode 1, it is so bad. It is ridiculous. It is comically bad to the point where, if you've ever heard yourself on a recording and it makes you cringe, I am that bad. But it took me having to fire and then aim and make some adjustments. And so what I would say is, if you're thinking of starting a podcast, if you're thinking of starting a YouTube station, if you're thinking of starting a blog, whatever it is that or a business, if you're thinking about doing it, just do it and then make adjustments after you've already started. Because if you're delaying the start, there's a good chance you'll never get there. So I always just say, just start and figure it out after you've started.
Fantastic advice. Well, thanks again, Rob. You could talk to you much longer about this. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I'm sure people will want to hear more from you. How can they listen to your podcast and get in touch?
So a couple different ways. If they want to listen to the podcast, all of the episodes, however they're listening to this podcast, they can find it. It's MWF Motivation. It's on SoundCloud, it's on Stitcher, it's on iTunes, it's on all of the platforms you could think of. So MWF just means Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It comes out 3 times a week. So MWF Motivation, or they could go to mwfmotivation.com. Or if they want to be one of the almost 79,000 people I think that follow on Facebook, it's facebook.com/MWF Motivation.
Fantastic. Well, that's definitely worth a download to your podcast player. And again, I appreciate it. It's been fantastic having a chat, and I feel more motivated already. Looking forward to hearing more from you.
Great. Well, it's been great to talk. I appreciate having me on.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Rob. Have a great day.